Children's Church. I missed you all last week. I wanted to thank you all for your support and prayers and allowing us to go back to Texas for a funeral for a few days. I'm grateful for our staff. I'm grateful for James, who made some quick arrangements for me to be able to leave. I dropped that on them, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday last week, and Drew had a great message. James, I'm sure, had a spirit-filled worship time. I hope to not go back there for a while, especially for another funeral. If you have your Bibles, we'll be in Ephesians chapter 3 this morning. When I was in college, I was a part of a ministry with our school called BSM, and they had asked me to take the lead on a service project that they wanted to do in Abilene. So I laid out a plan, and then I decided that I wanted to have the school be a part of it. So I tried to schedule a meeting with the dean. Now, I understand that people are busy, but I kept getting put off. And it shouldn't be that hard, in my opinion, to get 20 minutes of somebody's time to ask them for some help. And so nonetheless, weeks and weeks went by, and I kept getting rescheduled. So I had to take matters into my own hands. It was homecoming week, and our university had just purchased a bunch of flags to hang around campus, similar to the ones they put out on game days for North Scott. Now, I don't want to condone or encourage what my next steps were, but at the same time, I felt like this was my only option. So me and a friend of mine waited until dark, and we drove around campus, and we stole well over 50 of the flags that were hanging around campus. It was quite a feat because they weren't on, they weren't at ground level. We had to drive around in a pickup and with a ladder and get all these things down. A couple days later, when we realized that nobody knew where the flags were, I sent an email to the dean to let her know that I had some information about the stolen flags. Guess what? I got a meeting that day. I returned the flags, and then I proceeded to ask her for the help with the service project. Now, of course, she was not happy with me. But desperate times call for desperate measures. If you were to go to Hardin-Simmons today during homecoming week, you will still see the flags, but you will also see a lock on all of them where you can't get them off. I think at times, when we think about God, we don't understand that we don't have to schedule an appointment with Him. We don't have to wait until we mess up before we can approach Him. Ephesians 3:12 reads, "In whom we have boldness and access with confidence through our faith in Him." I want you to think of this boldness as a little kid walking into your bathroom unannounced. That's the kind of boldness that we have when we approach God. Those kids, think about it. Moms, they walk in there with boldness and confidence, don't they? They don't need to knock. They don't care what you're doing. It doesn't matter how many times you have to duck and cover when you're changing. They are walking into that place with some authority. But as they get older, right, they learn how to knock. They learn that it's not appropriate to stick their fingers underneath the door. They know when not to bother you. And so that boldness, it kind of goes away, doesn't it? Now they knock or they just flat out don't bother you. As my kids have gotten older, we have to go and find them, right? We have to go search them out because they want to lock themselves away in the room. As we get older, and as we know the Lord more, we should be bold and more confident to approach Him. We don't need to knock. There isn't certain times that He doesn't want to be bothered. I have known people, and maybe you're one of these, I've known people who will hide from God in a sense until they get a sign from Him, right? Until He comes and He knocks on their door. That isn't how it should work. Because of Jesus, you just knock that door down. In our passage here in Ephesians, the word translated boldness is a word that indicates a formal introduction. A formal introduction into the presence of a king. In much the same way that you can't just approach the President of the United States today, in the ancient world, one could not enter into the presence of the king unless they had been summoned and were brought into the presence of the king by one of his court officials. Perhaps you remember the story of Esther in the Old Testament. After she had learned of Haman's plan to kill the Jews, she couldn't just go into the king and tell him, even though she was the queen. She either had to wait until she was summoned by the king, or she could just go in with hopes that the king would present his golden scepter to her. If he didn't do that, then she would have been killed. Fortunately, because of God's providence, the king did offer the scepter when Esther took the risk of entering into his presence without being summoned. For those of us who are God's children, Jesus serves as our introducer. He's the one who escorts us into the presence of the king. And He's the only one that has the authority to do that. And just to make sure we don't miss this principle, Paul ends verse 12 with one more reference to the fact that Jesus is the one who has gained access on our behalf. We have boldness, not because we're awesome, but because Jesus has made the introduction. And our faith in Him is all we need. The golden scepter is constantly held out because Jesus has made the introduction once you put your faith in Him. It's consistently ready for you. He's consistently ready to accept you as you approach Him. Paul mentions where our confidence comes from in his letter to the church in Corinth. He says, such is the confidence that we have through Christ towards God. Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God. When was the last time you busted down the door to get to the Lord? Confidence changes situations, doesn't it? Being bold changes situations. If you act like you know what you're doing, nobody seems to stop you from doing things, do they? Back in college, I took a trip with some friends of mine to California. One of my friends' family had a beach house in Malibu, and so we went over there and we were going to spend a week. While we were there, we somehow got tickets to American Idol. I don't remember how that came about, but we got them. I don't remember what season they were on, but it was the one where Fantasia had won, if you remember that far back. The reason I remember was because after the filming of the show, they had everyone escorted out by rows. Everyone. So where we were seated gave me an opportunity that I wasn't going to miss. And so a couple of us stayed behind and we went the opposite direction. And I told them, just act like you know what you're doing and nobody's going to stop us. So we made our way to the front of the stage. We got onto the stage and we grabbed some cables that were laying around and we just started rolling them up. Once we had some of the cables, we looked to someone who actually belonged there and actually knew what they were doing, and we went up to him and was like, hey, where should we put these? Oh, there's a case in the back. If you just go behind the stage, there's a case just laying all right there. Now we're backstage. So we grab some other equipment, and we start walking down this hallway, and long story short, we got to meet Fantasia. We got to meet Ryan Seacrest, who was talking to Randy Jackson at the time. And we have a picture somewhere. This was before camera phone, so it's not readily available. There's cameras out there. But walking in confidence got us an experience that nobody else in that auditorium had. Acting like you know what you're doing gives you experiences that maybe nobody else has. When it comes to the creator of the universe, Jesus gives you that confidence. We can boldly approach His throne. Hebrews 4 tells us to boldly approach the throne of grace with confidence. When you do, you will get to experience what a lot of people don't. You'll get to experience His presence. You'll get to experience His peace. He is approachable. He is gentle. He is always accepting because He sees you. When He looks at you, He sees His Son. Be bold and confident in your relationship with the Lord. Now, once you are in God's presence, be yourself. Once you're in His presence, once you've boldly walked in there, just be yourself. When God first created Adam and Eve, they had access into the presence of God. And even though we don't have a lot of details from the account in Genesis, there is every indication that they felt free to be themselves in the presence of God. For instance, the Bible records that they were both naked and felt no shame. But when they sinned, everything changed. Because of their guilt, Adam and Eve ran and they hid from God. And from that time forward, man's relationship with God was forever changed. Before Jesus, no one had continuous access to God. From time to time, God chose to appear to leaders like Moses or the prophets, but God decided when and where and how to do that. But even though no one has had unrestricted access to God, God wanted to manifest His presence among His people. He chose to do that in the tabernacle and later in the temple. And that's not the case anymore. The word translated confidence here in Ephesians chapter 3 is a word that originally conveyed the idea of freedom of speech. What I think Paul means here is that we can approach God with confidence. And we also have the freedom to speak openly before Him. Now, believe it or not, occasionally I am in a situation where I don't feel the freedom to be myself. Have you ever seen people greet the Queen of England, or I guess now the King of England? They have to bow. They have to curtsy. There are all these rules they have to follow in order to not be offensive. If you see the same people later that day who are bowing and curtsying, I guarantee you that's not how they're greeting their friends, is it? I don't think they walk up to their friends and take a bow. I doubt the wife will curtsy when her husband gets home from work. Now, ladies, you might try it. You might try it. But we have to put on a different persona when we meet certain people. My sweet wife is constantly giving me the look and telling me, you can't say that. Daniel, you need to stop talking. The other day we were sitting at a baseball game and there was a 5 or 6 year old boy in front of us. And he would not sit down and he kept getting in my line of sight right as I'm trying to watch my kid bat. Now, I fully understand how difficult it is to be a 6-year-old boy and sit still because I have one. I wasn't mad at the kid. I wasn't frustrated at the kid. I was just simply stating the fact to my wife that I could not see. Sina kept telling me to stop mentioning because his parents are right there and they might hear me and get offended by what I'm saying. I wasn't saying anything offensive, but Sina knows that in our culture, it is possible that they could get mad and take offense that I couldn't see and that I was saying something about it. With God, I can be myself. I don't have to hide my feelings. I don't have to watch what I say in regards to offending Him. When I'm angry, I let Him know. When I'm sad, joyful, frustrated, I don't hold any punches. When I'm standing on a stage at a funeral for a 35-year-old and I see her 5-year-old daughter sobbing into her daddy's arms, and I have all kinds of questions to God about why He would allow this to happen. He knows them. He knows these are questions that I have. He knows these are issues that I'm struggling with. He already knows my thoughts, so I just give them to Him because I know that He can handle it. Be yourself before God. You don't have to clean yourself up. You don't have to put on a fancy dress or suit. Just be yourself in your stained sweatpants and your team building exercise 1999 t-shirt. Just be who you are. There's so much freedom in that. There's so much peace in that. Be yourself, because maybe other people can't handle you. Maybe other people can't handle who you are. But God can. He knows you. Finally, we learn from verse 13 that God will use your suffering. God will use your suffering. The word translated sufferings indicates something that is under extreme pressure. So Paul is not describing here some minor problems. He is writing about the kind of troubles that press against us, the kind of troubles that weigh us down. This morning, many of you may be experiencing that kind of suffering in your life right now. For some of you, it may be a physical affliction where you're in constant pain and you're no longer able to do the things you once were. For some of you, it might be the crushing emotional stress of a broken relationship, or the unending pressure and stress of your job. I know that I can't even begin to describe this morning all the different types of crushing suffering that you might be going through right now. But suffering reveals what's truly inside of us. When you put metal under immense heat, where it melts, all the impurities float to the top. They're easily scraped off. They're easily taken out. When you are under intense pressure, what comes out a lot of times is what needs to be removed from your life. Every time I think that I've grown in patience, I am reminded that I still have a long way to go every time I'm put in a really stressful situation. That still comes up in me at times. So take your suffering or take your times of extreme pressure to realize that maybe God is trying to remove some of the impurities in your life. Maybe He's trying to sanctify you through that process. Take that as an opportunity to confess, to get help, to draw near to His throne so that you can find healing. Paul saw his suffering as a way that God works. He says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard, and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So maybe a good question to ask is what is God doing through my suffering? What is God doing through my suffering? Because oftentimes we suffer for the benefit of others. My friend Alyssa passed away last week. I don't know why her little girl and her husband have to suffer right now. But I do know that at her service, the gospel was preached. I do know that Ryan is standing firm in his faith as a testimony to the goodness of God. I do know Alyssa well enough to know that if one person came to faith because of her death, she would say it was worth it. Our friend Pam, who many of you met a couple weeks ago, lost her 16-year-old son in a car accident about a few years ago. Pam and her husband Quentin are such a testimony of the goodness of God that there is no doubt in my mind that their suffering has changed lives. We were talking in our home the other night about the joy she feels. The joy she feels knowing that we will see people in heaven that are there because of her son's death. That is an eternal perspective. That's not temporary, that's eternal. Paul says in Romans 8 that our present sufferings are not worthy to be compared to our future glory. There's a very clear connection here between God's glory and the future glory that will be experienced by God's children. Paul writes that it is God's glory that will one day be revealed in us, and that the sufferings that we go through play a role in that process. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul writes that our unveiled faces reflect the Lord's glory. We are able to reflect God's glory because we have unrestricted access into his presence through Jesus. Right now, we are being transformed into the likeness of an ever-increasing glory. That's the process of sanctification. And that process is leading to the day where we will one day experience the glory of God in full. That will be the glorification. But because it is the sanctification part of the process that we experience the most suffering, or experience all of our suffering, most of us would just like to kind of skip that part and skip that process and just get to the glorification part of it. But that's not how God has chosen to work. Last week when we were in Texas, there was a storm here, wasn't there? I saw numerous pictures of a double rainbow that followed that storm. That rainbow came with a price, though, didn't it? There was some hail damage. There was some additional flooding caused by the rain. There were some trees knocked down. The key to enjoying rain is to look at it as part of the process of producing the rainbow. Most of us really don't like suffering either. But the key to dealing with the suffering, the key to dealing with the immense pressure is to view it as part of God's eternal plan. We need to view our troubles as God's work in our lives and in the lives of others so that we can share in his glory. Moms, you have a hard job, an oftentimes thankless job. Times where you are suffering, and times where you are doubting if you are doing things right. The rainbow is coming if you will continually and boldly approach the throne of grace. When you are frustrated, at the end of your rope, broken, boldly and confidently knock down the door just like your 5-year-old does when he's looking for you. If there has been anything that has caused me to seek after the Lord more, it would be having children. There are so many unknowns. So many times I begin to doubt that what we are doing is right. So many times that we begin to question, is this the right option or is this the right option? I'm so grateful that we have God who will guide and lead us. So moms, not just moms, get on your knees before him for your children. Teach them to boldly and confidently approach his throne. Every time they bust in the door, remind them that that's how they can approach the creator of the universe. We're going to sing one more song. Like we do every week, I guess. And maybe today's the day that as we sing, that you boldly approach the altar. You confidently bow before him and seek his face. This is not a place for timidity. There's something that happens here. There's something that happens when we boldly and humbly lay before him. And so I'm going to pray for us. Ask the worship team to come back up. And as they lead us, maybe you need to spend some time at the altar. Maybe you're in the midst, in a time of intense pressure right now. And you need some prayer. You don't know where else to go. I'm telling you, it's here. It's here. And so I'll ask the prayer team to be available to walk with you and pray with you. But the reality is you don't need them. They're here to minister to you, but you don't need them. The Lord can minister to you right where you are. All right? So let me pray for us. Father, I pray that you will that you will speak to our hearts, that you will give us the confidence, that you will remind us that because of Jesus, because of our faith in Jesus, you are approachable. And you hear us, and we don't have to pretend. We don't have to put on a mask. And so, Father, I pray that in this time that you'll just speak to our hearts, that we will understand that we are accepted and loved by you. So I pray you speak. I pray you minister to the hearts of your people. I pray that you will give us childlike faith as we knock down the door to your presence. So God, I pray you work. I pray you move. We thank you for Jesus that we have this opportunity. And so, Father, I pray that your presence will just dwell right here at this altar. That as we come and lay at your feet, people will find healing. People will find peace and love and acceptance and joy and answers. So God, I pray you work, pray you move. This time is yours. In your name we pray.